Hello, everybody. Thanks for having me here today. BD Canada is committed to empowering women at every stage of their health journey. We leverage the global reach of our technology and innovation so that healthcare workers and patients have access to life-saving technologies, regardless of geography, demographics, or socioeconomic status. From prevention and early detection to treatment and ongoing support, we're dedicated to making a positive impact on women's health in Canada. Women's health affects us all, and by highlighting key topics like breast cancer, cervical cancer, urinary incontinence, and menopause, BD aims to educate, reduce stigma, and produce actionable steps towards better care for Canadian women. Recently, at our head office in Mississauga, we organized a 3-day event series called Women's Health Takeover. I think some people in the room are there. This program aimed to raise awareness, share real stories, and spark conversations that matter. And it's just the first of many such initiatives to come. BD Canada is proud to work alongside patients, clinicians, and health organizations to support women's health through innovation and collaboration. By shining a light on important health topics and sharing insights from experts, patient voices, and our partners, we hope to inspire progress and change. I want to welcome Lori Brotto, internationally recognized as a leader in sexual health research. She has mentored 149 trainees and evaluated psychological interventions for sexual dysfunction and genital pain, which collectively impact 1/3 of all women. Her work influences practice internationally, with mindfulness now implemented in sexual medicine centers and recommended as frontline care in international guidelines. In recognition of her contributions, she holds a Canada Research Chair in Women's Sexual Health, has received recent awards in mentoring junior faculty, excellent public education through media, book awards, and is listed among the top 2% cited scientists by Stanford. And now Hilary Kilgour is co-founder and managing partner of Audaxa Ventures, a seed stage investment fund that invests early stage capital in the most promising tech solutions in climate and health. Hilary is deeply embedded in Canada's innovation ecosystem. She's built cutting edge accelerators and innovation programs and has guided hundreds of founders through the complexities of the capital landscape, helping them harness the country's competitive edge. Hilary is an entrepreneur in residence focused on climate and health at Mars Discovery District, Canada's largest innovation hub, and a founder services advisor at Venture Lab, a leading tech startup hub that helps Canadian startups build, grow, and scale their businesses. Very excited for our conversation, or your conversation. I'm not part of it, thankfully. I wouldn't have anything to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter, for a wonderful introduction. It's a pleasure to be here with you, Dr. Laurie Grotto. I have enormous respect for you. And hearing your bio, I think what was missing from that is the many hats that you wear in this ecosystem. And so, having been at the Femtech gathering in Montreal last year and seeing how active you've been in bringing forward the entire sector across the country, it's an honor to be interviewing you as part of this fireside chat. And I'm just excited for the conversation with you.
Likewise, Hilary, I'm really excited to be here. I'm actually a little bit nervous. I'm used to speaking to healthcare providers and researchers, but what I love is the multidisciplinary audience. So can't wait for the Q&A.
As a founder, you've spent much of your career studying women's sexual health. What first drew you to this area? Why do you think sexual concerns remain so underdiscussed and undertreated in healthcare today?
Yeah, thanks, Hilary. So, what drew me to the field of women's sexual health is Viagra. How on earth did a medication approved for the treatment of erectile dysfunction lead me to women's sexual health research? So, I was an animal researcher for 6 years. And I was struck by Rachel's opening remarks because I was indeed one of the animal researchers that was studying female sexual response in male rodents. And it was because of the influence of the pesky hormones interfering with our ability to really understand the impact of antidepressants and stress and things like that. So in Canada, Viagra was approved in 1999. And serendipitously, it was the same year that I got my master's degree. And suddenly we had this safe, efficacious, easy to obtain, everyone was talking about it, medication for the treatment of erectile dysfunction in men, which impacts about 10% of men across ages. And as a good graduate student, I did a literature search and said, well, surely there must be something similar for women. Guess what? You saw the slide. There is a single Health Canada approved medication for sexual dysfunction in women in Canada, and that's 2025. in 1999, the study of women's sexual health hadn't even started yet. So I left the rat lab, started to do research with women, listening to the experiences of women. And what I discovered in my own research, and certainly borne out in the science, was sexual concerns in women were at least twice as prevalent as they were in men. And the science was absolutely scant, both the pharmaceutical medical science as well as the psychological science. So I've been really passionate about closing that gap. So contributing to the science to help us understand the nature of sexual concerns in women, and how can we develop evidence-based treatments to make sure that they get into the hands of women. And in case you are still wondering why sexual health isn't that sort of a fringe private thing that happens, it ends at menopause. No, it doesn't. It impacts when it's not going well. It can be the leading reason why people are not compliant with their medications. It can have a direct impact on mood, quality of life. It can directly impact new relationships or the wanting to be in relationships, and can absolutely profoundly impact a person's sense of self. So sexual health is health, and it should be something that we should be taking more seriously.
Thank you. Love that your story started with Viagra. And I'm sure there are many people in this audience who have similar experiences of learning something. And I just wanted to share one personally, which was a couple years ago, I contacted my insurance provider because contraceptives were not included as part of my health plan. And I was explained by the person on the other line that male dysfunction was not covered either, and therefore those were equivalencies. And what I thought was so interesting is not only was he misinformed of that, he was willing to put that down on paper and send that to me as evidence of what that company was willing to stand by. And so that was 5 years ago. I think there are many examples where organizations have a lot of work to do from that perspective. And I think the key thing is people confusing sexual health and gender as being somehow the same thing. And I think we've all had experiences like that. So to me, what's so interesting is not only have you studied it extensively, you're a leader in this capacity, but you're also now a founder and in the founding space. So my question is, how have your experiences as a clinician, because I think we have a lot of clinicians in the audience, but also researchers, serving women has shaped your decision to take your research to commercialization? And was there a specific turning point where you made that decision that this shouldn't just be research anymore? It needed to be in practice.
Yeah. Thanks, Hilary. And I know there's some experts in the room in the domain of knowledge translation. One of the things we know is that there's an enormous gap in the number of years. On average, it takes 17 years from a scientific finding from publication to make some sort of translation into policy, practice, guideline, or something else. That's an enormous gap. And so, what we've seen in Canada, thanks to the incredible work of the Canadian Institutes of Health Research, as well as other bodies, is efforts to really improve how we speed that up. And it's absolutely critical, and it's because the vast majority of scientific findings, including my own, and I have a few hundred publications, nobody reads. Maybe my students read them. No one else reads them. The public doesn't benefit from most of the science that we're producing. And so that was for me was the turning point, was when I was approached by a publisher to write a book, and I was starting to get phone calls from people saying, "Oh my gosh, science of women's sexuality, I didn't realize that." And I turned around and said, "But there's now been hundreds and hundreds of publications on this topic." So it made me realize as a researcher and also as a clinician that we've failed in the way of knowledge translation. We've failed in the way of how do we actually take these incredible innovations and make sure that they reach the people they're intended to benefit. When we write our research grants, we always talk about the larger societal good that will come from the research that we do, but we fail miserably in actually following that through. So in my area of sexual health, we know, thanks to a lot of really good research, that there is strong evidence for psychological treatments. And again, a testament to that is the fact that there's only one Health Canada approved medication for low desire in premenopausal women. There's nothing approved by Health Canada for the treatment of low desire in postmenopausal women. Yet we've got these excellent psychological treatments, mindfulness based therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, but we have barriers in access, right? There's taboo, there's stigma. The majority of women with sexual concerns will never talk to a healthcare provider unless it impacts fertility. So genital pain is far more likely. A woman's far more likely to talk to a healthcare provider than, say, low desire or difficulties with arousal. So lots of gaps, cost gaps, geographic gaps, personal gaps, and that we're not adequately training our healthcare provider and primary care on how to ask these questions about this critically important a domain of life. So several years ago, dear colleague of mine, Kyle Stevenson, who's a researcher at Xavier University, we were chatting one day. We'd always wanted to collaborate together. We're both really passionate about knowledge translation, and we said, what are we going to do to close this gap, to take the science and bring it into the lives of women? And we said, how about we build a website? Back in 2016. So that's where eSense was born. And now eSense is a digital tool that we've tested thanks to funding from the Canadian Institutes of Health Research, from Health Research BC. And the new CEO, Jeff Payne, is in the room, as well as smaller foundations, Canadian Cancer Society, most recently BC Women's Health Foundation. And what we've found is that eSense is incredibly efficacious for improving sexual health, sexual function in women, reducing distress, and so importantly, they now learn skills that they continue to practice when we reassess them a year later.
So I'm going to dig in on that, which is this is a room where we've heard a lot about research. As an investor, we hear a lot about research, and we're always looking to understand, okay, what is the solution and how does it solve it? And really, how do you make money doing it? So I won't go fully into that, but tell us a little bit more about the solution and how it solves for, and how you've been able to really narrow in on that solution as being kind of the solution in this competitive market.
Yeah, and Hillary, this is where you're going to see me trip up because reminder, I'm a scientist, right? So scientific method, we have null hypotheses, we measure things through the experimental method, we power our studies, and we look at p-values. So when I hear about things like what you just talked about, it makes me a little bit uncomfortable. You're going to see me shake a little bit in my chair. The solution is improving sexual health so that no woman with sexual health concerns is suffering in silence. That's kind of the crux of the problem we're trying to solve. The bigger problem trying to solve is to improve quality of life, right? And to do so by providing a tool that gives women autonomy, confidentiality, and empowerment to do this on their own terms, on their own time, at a pace that feels right for them. And woven into this is equity, right? Because we know that even the 10% of women who will go and talk to a primary care provider about sexual health concerns, they tend to be white, educated, higher socioeconomic status. And we have huge barriers among persons of color, disabled women, women who are living in geographically remote areas, where those barriers are simply compounded. So in developing eSense and over the last several years, we've been refining it and adapting it to unique populations of women in order to close that equity gap. We want to make sure that eSense is not just effective for the women who have the voice to ask for help, but more importantly, the women who don't.
That's great. I'm gonna drill a little bit more in, and really, it was on my own bias when I got to know eSense. Was why would it not be focused on early sexual health education? Because that's an early intervention. But my understanding is that you focused on menopause, and so can you tell us a little bit about why there? I think we've talked a little bit about why menopause is such an important but under marketed or commercialized solution. Why would you have chosen that as the stage for eSense to focus on first?
Well, Hillary, you're foreshadowing the future because in an ideal world, we'd see eSense for 12-year-olds, right? So providing core basic sexual health knowledge that's developmentally appropriate, that is done in a way that's not re-stigmatizing for young people. And to be honest, a lot of sex ed, even today, is focused on, it's shame-based, it's about avoiding STIs, don't get pregnant, etc. So that's kind of pie in the sky idea. So in our research, we didn't exclusively recruit peri and postmenopausal women. It was women of all ages, including females who don't identify as women, so gender diverse individuals as well. But what we found is that specifically for the peri postmenopausal group around age 39 to 60, that was the predominance of the women who sought us out. And on top of that, we're really having a conversation about menopause. And if you're not yet, you will be after today because your phones are listening to us right now and picking up the algorithm. Menopause, menopause, menopause. what we know is that, with the increased conversation around menopause, that we are recognizing that women are continuing to thrive well through peri and postmenopause, and they struggle in key domains like genital urinary symptoms, like sexual dysfunction, and the other 30 plus symptoms. And so it's also an opportunity to say, okay, among all the other aspects of quality of life in menopause that we're addressing, it's imperative that we also address sexual health as well. We've also found in our outreach, and I'll really credit Elaine Wandler, our CEO, for doing some of the outreach. The menopause clinics are super key. Like they're ready to sign on eSense tomorrow because they see it as a gap in their own training. So we're gonna ride that wave for as long as we can.
And I'll add to that, it strikes me that there are 2 other pieces, which is it's when women are leaving the workforce. We heard about it earlier today. We also know that women at that stage have a bit more money to be able to pay for solutions, so I'm curious how that's factored in. But I'll follow up on that, which is I understand CBT and mindfulness are a part of your solution, but they're also not new concepts. The idea of digitalizing them for sexual health is. So what did the early developmental process look like? And how important for you was it to prove that eSense could be effective as an in-person therapy?
You're watching me cringe when you say prove, and again, this is my scientist coming through because we never use language of proven. We say the evidence supports the efficacy of this tool in the 250 women I have studied. But as I'm learning in the entrepreneurial landscape, I have to sort of lean into that space and use words like proven, most women. So the early days, I will emphasize, it was all patient engaged. This means we sat at a table and we storyboarded out what this was going to look like with women with lived experience of sexual problems on the other side of the table, guiding it through, helping us write the case stories that eSense follows. Everything from the color scheme to the font size to the contrasts were done totally and completely patient engaged. And increasingly, we've been moving also into the space of cancer survivorship, where we know with post chemotherapy, brain fatigue, it was even more important to enhance the contrast of things like color and font, et cetera. So we've built that into eSense as well. So putting the patient experience at the absolute center was critical to Kyle and I. The second absolutely non-negotiable was that it was built in science. And we weren't ready to even, utter anything about eSense to the outside world until we had done and published 4 feasibility studies, a large randomized clinical trial, an implementation science study, and then we were moving on to adaptation. So many, many years of scientific study, it published in peer-reviewed journals. And that's why it's taken us 8 years to get to where we are today.
And I'll ask you one last question before you can ask me any questions about capital. Turn the seats. Misinformation. We hear a lot about misinformation, and I think it's a topic that we're hearing a lot more out of the health sector, particularly around public health. But I'm curious how misinformation is impacting what you're building.
Yeah, I recently did a literature search. I like to see what Google's telling people every once in a while. And I did a lit search not a lit search, Google search last week. And my search terms were, well, what are the leading treatments for low desire in Google? And that's, by the way, where most people will go. And the top hit was a vasectomy clinic. And then the next 4 hits were anti aging products. So this is where the public goes. The public goes to Google, to ChatGPT, definitely social media as well. And it is ripe with misinformation, more so in women's health than not. And it's also because women represent the largest consumer body in wellness products. It's a multi-trillion-dollar industry in wellness products. And so, whether it's menopause or sexual health, there is a ton of misinformation, which is unintentional, and frank disinformation. So in the intentional spreading of messages that are incorrect. And in part, I do want to put some of the responsibility on the scientists. We need to be in that space. We need to be in the spaces where people are searching and start to infiltrate the heck of it with accurate scientific based information. It's not adequate for us to sit back and say, who are those people who are spreading misinformation about women's health? We're not going to stop them. We need to be in the space. We need to get loud and we need to share science.
Thank you. It's such an important role.
All right, Hilary, you ready? The role of capital. And I'm going to really try and focus on your answers because I'm intrigued by what you have to say. So, Hillary, you're now building a fund that prioritizes social innovation, specifically climate and health tech. What inspired you to take that leap? And what role do you see Femtech playing in your portfolio?
I think what's interesting is there's a lot of people in this room that have been a part of my own journey. And so I was reflecting on this question and thinking about it from three perspectives. One as an innovator. So I spent about a decade and a half working inside large organizations, trying to bring technologies from idea or even bring them into our own organizations from an adoption perspective. And it was very hard. Frankly, it was really hard as an organization to be able to bring something in when it was so early. And so I saw that difficulty, but I also met extraordinary founders who were doing really great things. And as someone within an organization, it was really hard to be able to support them and bring them in. Secondly, as an operator and a founder, I saw how hard it was to navigate the space. And I also have worked with hundreds of founders, men, women, non binary founders. It is hard to navigate not just building a company, but also raising capital to get to that second stage. Rachel really hit on the data, and it's not getting better, sadly. And so that was really something that motivated me, and it's why our fund specifically invests in women-led founders. And we get a lot of pushback about that, which is why just women-led? There's a lot of other founders out there. For us, that's embedded in our thesis, which is we believe that women are the leading solutions to these challenges. They're just undercapitalized and misunderstood. And so that's another key part. And then thirdly, I would say as an investor, I often find myself, and I think there's exceptions with the people here in this room, at tables with other investors who don't look like me and certainly don't understand the markets that we're talking about today. And it's great to see men in the room here today. I think we need more men in the space understanding what we're talking about here today. But the stories you will hear, they're true. Often it is women sitting at the table trying to convince someone that this is worth investing in. It often is children or family members of those male investors who have to be convinced that this is an idea. And frankly, what I've seen is that this is an industry of collaboration. No early stage investment is done by one fund. They are shared investments, and it's an opportunity for that collaboration we were talking about to really come to the forefront. So it's one of the reasons that we're building in this space.
Love it. From your investor perspective, why do you think Canada has been slow to commercialize and scale academic research, particularly in women's health?
So I just got back from Europe. I was actually in Amsterdam, Brussels, and Paris over the last week and a half. And I will say that the perception of Canada is different than our own perceptions. The world thinks that we are very good at this, and the world thinks that we are very good at bringing our research to commercialization. And yet, when we talk amongst ourselves as Canadians, um, we don't have that perception. And so I think one of the key things is we're very good at research. We're not great at starting things. And frankly, I'll turn the hat on myself, which is we're not great at taking the risk until we have proof that the risk is worth taking. And so it's a conversation that I know investors, angel investors, early stage investors have all the time, which is what is the thing here that we need to see the possibility for to move forward? Um, and I would say we have really great research in this country. We don't take the risks to start building soon enough. And that's just my perception is that we need to just start building. And I also recognize that that's really hard because it's often not funded. And so we need to find ways to pair the funding solutions, non-dilutive, and equity and early stage together and have more honest conversations about what that actually looks like in practice.
Wonderful. It leads beautifully into the next question, which is, as you think about the companies, many of whom are in the room, what kind of evidence do you find the most convincing? Is it clinical validation? Is it early adoption data, user data, something else? And I'm taking notes carefully.
So every investor is different, is the first thing I will say. So this is very much a unique question. As an investment fund, we have go, no go. So as a fund, our thesis is impact driven. So we want to know that there's an outcome, there's a deliverable health outcome. I think that's probably true for a lot of health investors, but we want to see that the health outcome is positive and it will grow, but also that there aren't unintended consequences that haven't been thought through of that health outcome. So that would be one. The second one would be a pathway to commercialization, that we can see that venture making money. So that's why I asked the question, which is we want to know that there's a business model that can make money doing this, or else it's going to be a very hard path. And then the second one is, or the third one I would say is traction. And so I think one of the things that I often see is that, and frankly, I've experienced myself, is that we'll be doing something in a lab or we'll be doing something in a really small group and not taking it out to market soon enough to test it with people, to get those early responses and to get those early LOIs and commitments to actually taking it on. And perhaps the second part of that is charging someone for that. It's really important to have proof that someone will give you money for what you do. Doesn't have to be huge amounts, but it has to be that you were paid to do it, and that traction is a really important part of that.
So helpful. I want to ask about regulatory approval. So, a lot of founders struggle with when to pursue regulatory approval. Is it early to build credibility? Is it later to save costs? How do you view that decision from an investment standpoint?
So my short answer is start early. Start early, and I know a lot of founders that I've worked very closely with have started their conversations with Health Canada and FDA very early on in the process. We saw a few on the board, I'm not gonna call them out by name, but they're having those conversations from the outset. What is it that you're looking for? What does that look like? What are some of the indications that are gonna be really important? So start those conversations really early. I'll be the first to admit that I am not a regulatory expert in this room. Find regulatory experts amongst us, because I think there are quite a few in this room who can speak to it. Part of that's regulatory and part of that is IP. So those are two distinct parts of the equation, but it is really important to have an IP strategy and have your pathway to regulatory approval as part of that. But the reason I say start early is you want to have a clear sense of what your roadmap is and what you're doing and what you're not doing intentionally as part of that.
Would you say the same thing about IP, is having that? Yeah.
A founder once said this to me, and I love it, so I repeat it back. There are three reasons why you have an IP strategy. The one is to actually know what your IP is and when you plan to get that IP validated or to go through that process. The second is to know when you're going to defend it and when you're not going to defend it, because frankly, in the early stages, it's very hard to have the money to defend your IP, but you need to have a plan in place. And then the third is to know what your pathway is forward, what you're going to do at different stages. So, an investor in the same conversation said, well, you just need IP. You need to know as a founder why you're doing IP and what your plan is and be able to answer questions from that perspective.
Awesome. We can ask a show of hands later for how many regulators are in the room. So, last question to you for now, Hilary, and that is what would you say to investors who are hesitant to back women's health technologies or companies?
I would say the first thing is find out more, dig deeper. I've been in rooms where women have stood up and said, I'm here because I'm a woman, and that's it. I think we all know that there's opportunity in this space. We did at Femtech Gathering last year have an announcement of a new investment. So Sprout Family was announced last year. There's a couple of investors in the room who invested in them. Um, I am not in a position to publicly disclose some of the companies that are about to close their rounds, but there are some really great examples of companies that are getting investment. I think the Femtech Breakfast series is a really good example of some of those early stage ones. There are some that are at Series A and Series B that are actually about to close their rounds. So if you're looking for them, find out more, come find me, come find other investors. But I think the key thing would be if you're interested in this space, say that you're interested in this space, and look for the numbers because the numbers are there to prove that there's opportunities. And I would say the other piece is this is not niche. I hear it all the time. A pregnancy solution got on stage and someone said, well, this is a niche area. And I was like, well, no, it's not niche. I think we all know it's not niche. And often the excuse will be a market sizing question. And so the key question there is how to dive into the market sizing and find others who see the market opportunity there.
Awesome. Okay, so we have maybe about 4 minutes or so for questions, then we'll open it up to the audience. So I'll turn it back to you, Hilary.
I'm looking through my questions to get the most important last two. Um, I think the key other one would be if you were advising other researchers who want to follow in your footsteps or perhaps are a few years behind on their journey, what are the three most practical things you would share with them if of advice from early on in your journey?
Yeah, great question because we definitely are doing some backtracking now, doing filling in the gaps for things that we should have asked many years ago. And one is, really think about the end user as early on as possible. So as scientists, we use validated measures, we use established tools, but I wish I had thought about things like, how do people use this tool in the real world? Do they use it on their phone versus their laptop? Is there something we could have done differently early on to enhance engagement? So really thinking about those end user metrics that we don't necessarily have validated measures for. And this is where, again, makes scientists like me a little bit uncomfortable. I think the second thing that I wish I knew much earlier on was about protecting IP. So, we publish our scientific findings, and in one of our studies, we had included some images, some screenshots from eSense. Well, that IP now gets transferred to the publisher of that journal, and eSense no longer owns it. So it's things like that that I wish I had thought about as, as an entrepreneur, not just as a scientist. And thankfully my IP knowledge has advanced quite a bit since then. And then I think the last thing for me is engaging partners as early as on. So Hillary, as you said, engage the regulators early, engage the IP people early. I wish that we had engaged with business developers, with tech engineers, with other people much earlier on as we were building our tool. And this is what I've sort of taken on as my own mission is trying to educate as many other academics as can, just sharing my own story and advice that I would impart.
Awesome. And I'm going to ask you one more question because this is an interview for you. As you look ahead, what's your vision for eSense and for digital therapies in women's health more broadly? So, building on that, what's your vision moving forward that you think others should know more about?
Yeah, I mean, I think going back to my opening comments about closing the gap and lifting women's health through an equity lens, the vision is really about ensuring that women have equitable access to effective tools to live not just healthy but to thrive. And so that means for us making sure that eSense doesn't just work, but it really makes a difference in women's lives, that they have access to it. And maybe one day we'll be in a place like we were in 1999 talking about erections, where we can actually talk about women's sexual health without flinching. Okay, Hillary,
That's a
your turn.
I was gonna say that's a perfect wrap for questions. I think that's a wonderful wrap. I love that. I love that reminder that hopefully one day we can talk about sexual health without flinching, particularly women's sexual health. We have 10 minutes left for questions, so we'll open it up.
We certainly do. Are there some questions from the floor?